Great, the sound guy gets up to talk and the sound doesn't work. It's a classic situation. I know everybody's probably a bit tired by this point, and I apologise, but this talk may push some of you over the edge. It's pretty information dense, but hopefully you get a lot out of it. So good afternoon, my name is Byron Scullin. I'm a sound artist and designer based in Naarm, Melbourne, working on Wurundjeri country. Of course, I want to thank Lillian, Hannah, the team at Pika, and everybody else for making this event possible, including all the other speakers. I was able to catch a couple of the talks, and I think it's been a really fantastic session today. So thanks to everybody. And I've also just want to add my voice to other people that have recognised the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I specifically want to recognise them as the first musicians and artists on the land on which we're gathered here today. And I've been fortunate to work with the Noongar people here in Perth, and I'll talk about that a bit later in my presentation. I know that originally the session was listed as a demonstration, but as I developed the content for the talk, I decided that a kind of meaningful demo would be practical. So I apologise that I won't specifically be demonstrating in this session. We did have some gig ambitions originally, which I'll talk a bit about later as well. But I will be showing aspects of the platforms that I use to create spatial audio. And of course, I'll be around all day tomorrow and stuff. So if there's anything specific that you want to come and ask, or things you want to pointed questions or problems you want to have solved, I've got a lot of experience. I've done a lot of this work over the years. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. I've been working in music, sound and technology for my entire life. I grew up in rural Victoria, and I had the good fortune in 1982 at the age of 8 to play one of these, a Juno 60 synthesizer. The overriding memory that I have of the first few hours of hitting the keys, pushing the sliders, turning the dials and the switches, was that I'd found something wonderful and beautiful in this machine. Here was a machine that created weird new musical sounds that at the time sort of hit me like a wave, like containing new ideas, new feelings, and most importantly, like new territories to explore. On this machine, just by simply turning dials, I could build new worlds out of sound and music. And at that moment, I knew that I wanted to dedicate my life to exploring these tools and using them to create these sonic worlds for myself and for others to inhabit. So it's taken me to many places where sound and technology meet: live music, theatre, film, dance, TV, radio, audio, post-production work. Currently, I'm doing a lot of work in gaming, VR, and site-specific installation work. I've worked in these forms both in the support of other artists, but also with my own work. So standing here with you today after all those years, this feeling that I had when I first played that Juno still runs through me, but it's kind of become stronger and more refined. So I know this feeling now by lots of different names, like obsession, preoccupation, fascination. So as an obsessive, you should be warned that I can talk endlessly about all aspects of audio, technology, and art. As I'm here to talk about immersive audio in public spaces to you all, a group of people who are eager to explore the forefront of immersive and digital art, I want to use the time that we have to provide you with a map of the territory that I've discovered in my own ongoing exploration of immersive audio. We'll begin at the emergence of electrical audio technology to describe the development of spatial audio systems, most of which are most ubiquitous today. This technology has sort of developed out of scientific idealism and the demands of market capitalism, and I loosely call this sort of avenue of technology platonic systems. We'll also look at the contemporary status of these systems, and it is in this context I'll talk about the work Still that I designed for Far North Queensland dance company Dance North. We'll also step back briefly in time to describe a different approach to spatial audio that emerged out of France in the 1950s. And this approach I generally call like reveling in chaos. I hope by segmenting kind of this discovery of spatial audio in this way, I will empower all of you to consider that there are two, but there are also multiple possible approaches to understanding and conceptualizing audio in your own work. But also I want to equip you with some practical understanding so that you can begin or enhance your own journey into spatial audio. So as such, this talk is pretty oriented towards tools and technology, but we will take moments to digress into some sort of conceptual potential about what I'm talking about. But I also figure that you will consider the conceptual impacts of these technologies from your own perspective. We had before make art, not surveillance. So my thing is make art, not demos. So if there's one key idea I want you to take away from this talk and perhaps this symposium, is to encourage you all as artists, in all you do, at all stages of the creative process, to centre and prioritise manifesting into the world some form of diverse, enriching collective human experience. For most of us here, I think it's fair to say that technology kind of reeks with the stench of potential. It's a kind of godlike perfume that can be sort of heady and intoxicating with what might be. But when it comes to technology, I really advise you to retain, sharpen and consult your scepticism at every stage. I think asking yourself questions like, will this technology make for a better human experience of the idea that I'm expressing? Or will the investment of time and effort in learning and adopting this technology yield a profit in human connection that is a clear improvement over other systems or by other means? So systems in and of themselves, no matter how complex or sophisticated, won't do the important work of making those meaningful connections. That's the duty of the artist. By centering human connection and experience, we retain the potential to make art and not demos. It's often the case, and I think many here have experienced this, when in a non-experimental, non-work in progress setting, an artwork declares itself as a revelatory experience based upon the deployment of some new tech. We go and experience the work only to be left a little bit cold. Sometimes the meaning of the work has been obscured by too much focus on a system's potential and capability. And other times as an audience, there's an expectation that we'll just marvel at the fact that this new system has created or delivered this work. I think these works often just feel like tech demos masquerading as art. And it's my experience that this is what happens when artists disregard or forgets to centre their work on human experience. So what's the point of an artwork if all this technology doesn't in the end connect with a human's emotion and memory? Immersion in sound as a human experience has a vast history that we don't have time to cover here today, but it's an avenue that I encourage you all to investigate. What is important to note is that our desire to experience immersion in sound is not new, it's actually very ancient. From caves to cathedrals, our past is littered with countless experiences where immersion in sound occurs, and it's often tied to architecture or settings for ceremony and ritual intended to connect us to the sublime or the profound. A sound simply has to imply immersion rather than be truly immersive for it to take on this substantial quality. This exists as sort of part of our shared sonic lexicon and is simple to demonstrate. So I'm now going to play the same sound twice. The first time we hear it, there's no implied immersion. The second time there is. Both of these sounds are monaural or mono, meaning we're only hearing a single channel, even though there's two speakers. It's a single signal of audio. And it should be clear which of the two sounds feel more profound. The voice we're going to hear is of Yorta Yorta Ewan composer, singer, and all-round dead set legend, Deborah Cheatham. So why does a sound with reverb feel more profound? It's a representation that connects us to our own individual memories of being in a contained space where sound can bounce, echo, reflect, creating complex three-dimensional reflections that surround and immerse us as listeners. As listeners, we're primed for immersive experience. So while I would love to dig into these aspects, for the first section of this talk, I'm not going to talk about all that prehistory immersive stuff. Instead, I'm just going to focus on sonic immersion at the point at which electrical technology emerges around the late 1800s. Likewise, I'd like to go into the detail of the nature of sound as itself as a medium and explicitly discuss it. So at the core of music and sound and noise have this powerful ability to impart emotions, memories and ideas. They can feel as if they're emerging from the core of our bodies and being. Part of the power of sound is that it's not visible. And even when we do visualize it with tools, it naturally doesn't intuitively reveal itself as an object. In our natural listening state, we are in fact the subject of the sounds that we hear. An example of this is when we're in an emotional heightened state, we really don't take in the meaning of word objects. So for example, if somebody's yelling at you, you don't hear the words, you just hear the sound, the tone, the noise. To be able to listen objectively on demand is a skill that most listeners don't possess. It's a skill that takes time to develop, as it requires being able to rein in our default state of subjective listening, as well as taking control of our brain's capacity for ignoring unwanted sound, which is very powerful. A description of what objective listening state could be like is that when we hear speakers use languages that we don't understand. So in that instance, we just hear a bunch of strange sounds that have no meaning, produced with this odd flesh synthesizer that we have in our throats, called our voice. But even this example is a bit flawed, because when we communicate without understanding and knowing language, tone actually becomes even more important in that situation to decipher meaning. So if you have a desire to have a greater command of sound as a medium, I think finding a path to being able to listen objectively is actually a critical skill. But anyway, as you know, I could keep going on and on about this, but I'm not going to, because we're just going to get off track. We're not going to get through what we need to talk about. So let's get on and get some context with what's occurred in audio technology between now, late 1800s and now. This is from 1881. It's called the theatrophone, and it was invented by a Frenchman named Clement Alder, and the French will come up a little bit throughout this talk. It was basically a repurposed telephone system for listening into theatre performances in Paris. So they had 2 microphones on the stage connected to 2 earphones, and if any of you have heard of binaural listening, this is it. So this is binaural listening, and it comes from that far in the past. Basically, they had theatrephone consoles spread around Paris. You could go in and put 50 francs into the machine, choose a dial to listen into one of the opera houses, and listen to a concert that was taking place in Paris at that moment. This technology has been developed about the same time that Thomas Edison is actually developing the first recording technology. So the wax cylinder that he's developing in upstate New York, this is happening at the same time. Important to note that the company that commercialised this technology was around until the 1930s. In the 1930s, an engineer at EMI in the UK by the name of Alan Blumlein comes up with stereophonic sound, which is that third panel across there. The aim of stereophonic sound, and this panel is showing like early attempts at devising concepts for how to represent sound spatially. So you can see microphones and loudspeakers and a basic description of that network. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the aim of stereophonic sound, which is Blumlein's invention over on that far side, is actually to project a 3-dimensional sound from 2 speakers. So it's interesting to note that the idea of like a virtual immersive sound world is this old, like compared to say like other technologies that exist. So stereophonic sound though didn't find wide commercial use until the 1960s, which is when like transistor-based audio technology became easy to manufacture at lower cost. So this is when it was distributed, but the idea comes from early. Also, the other thing to note is that this concept designed by Alan Blumlein's research actually forms the basis of ambisonic recording, which is used a lot in VR and gaming today. So a lot of the physics and the science of this stuff is actually developed quite early on. The thing about stereo is that it's ubiquitous. However, the conditions to experience the 3D stereophonic image are very strict. So a listener has to be at one point in an equilateral triangle, which is this diagram here on the left. So you need to be perfectly positioned inside this equilateral triangle. Also, the picture on the right is showing you that you have to have your ear at the center point between the speaker, halfway between the high frequency and low frequency drivers, also called the tweeter and the woofer. Also, the acoustics of the surrounding space, where the speakers are and the listener is, will interfere with the sound image. So as the sound reflects off the walls and floor and bounces, it's actually going to sort of destroy this sort of hypnagogic 3D image that can appear out of the speakers. Of course, the more accurate the playback, the amplifiers, the speakers, the acoustics, the more vivid this 3D stereophonic image will be. And generally in sound reproduction with these things, when we're talking about the reproduction of a sound image, it's referred to as the sound stage. So the idea that we're representing a stage, a performance in front of us, virtually. Here we have Stereo Man. He has all the hallmarks of a hi-fi guy. He's middle-aged, he's got a beard, he's alone, he has questionable taste in interior design, and probably has questionable taste in music as well. So this is the kind of environment, though, that's really needed to perceive a high-quality and vivid stereo image. That's what these kind of audiophile guys are all about. Is about sort of having this sort of 3D experience of sound. You know, the Carpenters, Pink Floyd, the Eagles never sounded so good. Some important things to underline is that just because you have 2 speakers, it doesn't mean that you're hearing stereo image. There are heaps of examples where like 2 speakers doesn't equal stereo image. So big concerts outdoors on stages, you're not hearing stereo image. Headphones, you're not hearing stereo image. Cars, your sound system at home where you've got a couple of bookshelf speakers placed wherever. TVs, most TVs don't really do it properly, so on and so on. The point of all of this is that I'm starting to illustrate the problems of the platonic ideal in like sound image in trying to recreate a 3-dimensional sound image. What's happening here is the superposition of like one acoustic space on top of another. So we've got the room as it sounds, and then we're trying to sort of substitute another room on top of it. The thing with designing these rooms as well is they can't be completely dead acoustically. Like acoustically dead spaces are really fatiguing to listen to. So even though we can treat the room and get it ideal, it's still always going to sound like a room. Like rooms need to sound like rooms in order for the music to breathe and the sound to have some life. The thing that's important though about stereo is that they're ubiquitous. So like every tool that you pick up has the ability to do stereophonic imaging in it. The panner, the levels, there's so many tools that are just there. And they're so obvious that we don't even really think about it that much. Cinema plays a huge role in the influence of immersive audio technology. So cinema is the premier like immersive technology experience, if you like, at this stage. It's still still really is there. I mean, I think a lot of gaming and VR and these things are very rapidly catching up, but for most people, cinema is the immersive form. And it has a huge impact on the development of audio technology. I think also culturally too, when a lot of us imagine something, we tend to imagine things in cinematic conventions, and that includes sound. So when a lot of artists look to creative immersive experiences, they kind of begin here with these sort of cinema surround tools and using technologies designed for cinematic experience. So a lot of software and a lot of hardware, including like domestic stuff, has default surround stuff. It's pretty easy to be able to go in and buy a surround sound system at an electronics store. Most software, doors and things that people are using have surround panners built in. I think a lot of people look to this for their immersive work because the tools are there and they're available, but actually they're kind of not really appropriate, like for doing anything other than cinema. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And also too, because of this, it means that the creative process can be a bit of a bummer. It can be actually a bit of a drag doing this kind of work. So let's sort of go further into this. Up until a few years, this has been the dominant sort of immersive audio configuration, right? 5.1 surround sound. So the 5 is for the 5 speakers, left, center, right, left surround, right surround. The 0.1 is for the low frequency effects speaker, sometimes called the sub. So to get this to work as a proper hallucinogenic 3D image, all those same rules of stereo have to apply. So speaker position and placement, speaker height, ideal listening position and acoustics all play a role in like how vivid this immersive image can be. And again, like stereo, most folks don't know about this, and if they did know, they probably can't be bothered to set up their house like this, right? It's impractical. You kind of need one of those cinema rooms in a McMansion, but even folks that have those don't do this, right? So this system is used by a bunch of companies, though, to deliver their audio via proprietary formats. So most notably is Dolby Laboratories. So in Dolby's version, this is called Dolby 5.1 or Dolby Digital, but there are also other companies that deliver immersive formats and technologies. DTS is another company that some of you might see. A lot of that stuff's built into PC gaming systems. But these are all just platforms for delivering immersive audio experiences. But as you can imagine, if you do get this set up right, the actual immersive experience is pretty cool, right? But it's only for one person. This is where we sit today, right? And we mentioned some Dolby stuff before in one of the other talks. So this is a baseline configuration for like the current technology. So this is 7.1.4. So 7 surrounds on the ground, 1 low frequency effects speaker and 4 ceiling speakers, 7.1.4. Most of you have probably experienced this system, Dolby Atmos, in one form or another. And some of you might have even heard of this term Dolby Atmos and wonder what the hell it means. I don't have time to go deep into Dolby Atmos, we will be going back to it in a bit, but it's a big innovation because it's a model-based audio system. And we'll dig into this, as I said later. Again, you can see in this example, to get the true full-to-life kind of 3D immersive experience, there's an ideal listening position, and that is again for one person. But it begs the question, what about cinema? It's a mass experience of immersion, so what's going on there? Here we have a 3D image of a cinema with speakers and a fleshed out Atmos system shown here. Lots of channels here, so the audio nerds really get excited about this one. It's a pretty good immersive experience, but still there are other strict conditions. You need to be in a room that's acoustically treated, cinema. You need to face the same direction. The audio system in the screen is dominant, even as you can see in this picture. The speakers behind the screen are much more powerful than the surround speakers. And most of the content in cinema comes from these front speakers. Also, the tools to make this are complex. The setup is complex. It all gets very expensive. And no one really gets, in this context, the full 3D illusion the system is capable of. So the person sitting up in this back corner here is copying a lot of the surrounds. The person sitting down in this front corner here is getting a lot of the screen speakers, particularly that sort of right and centre channels. This is to say that we have a good time when we go to the cinema, right? It still sounds sick, like it's great. And if you go and see like a contemporary big budget Hollywood film like Dune or something, like, you know, the ceiling speakers, you hear things fly over your head and all that sort of stuff. It is kind of still a cool experience. But the thing is that there's still this point somewhere in this cinema where that three-dimensional kind of perfect hypnagogic platonic kind of sound image has the potential to emerge. And a lot of the technology underlying this is actually still built on that early work that Alan Blumlein did in the stereo stuff we showed you earlier. But what does this immersive technology mean for like artists working in galleries or creating site-specific work where technical specifications and tolerances can't be met, right? We have to talk about that as well later. Also, check out this list of multi-channel audio standards, right? So some of these are common, some of these are experimental. Each of these standards has the same thing going on a stereo. To get the most immersion out of the experience, you need to have all the stuff set up and for the conditions to be close to ideal as possible. So the reason I call this school of immersive art like the Platonic ideal is that in the minds of the audio engineers, acousticians, physicists, programmers, audiophiles, sound artists and designers, there exists this perfect idea of immersion in sound. And all of these technologies strive to create this experience. This is the sort of default state of audio immersion. So if you come to it completely naive, these are the kind of tools that you're probably going to encounter. If you do Google searches, this is probably what's going to show up. Because these are systems that are developed by market capital for the production and distribution of immersive audio experiences. There's a chain here from like research to production to consumption. I've seen a lot of artists use these technologies get caught in a tough position because what the ideal promises is what the artist would like, right? Full experiential immersion. But the reality is actually really lackluster due to the conditions it requires, the compromises most artists have to make in the process of actually getting it done. For example, knowing what we now know through this little bit of a talk, you can understand why white voids that are preferred by gallery designers are in fact perfectly, excellently bad conditions for any kind of immersive audio experience whatsoever. Okay? I'm glad that got a positive reaction. Apologies, gallery designers, I know you like your white surfaces. Let's have a little look at another Platonic technology, we're not going to leave here just yet, that's like Dolby Atmos, that brings us to the current state of play in cutting-edge immersive audio technology. So this brings us to Still, which is the public artwork that I designed and implemented for Dance North. It's important to note that it's not a dance piece. It's actually a light work, and the previous speaker spoke about James Turrell, and this is a sort of similar concept. It's from this artwork we're going to pivot away from this history and go into contemporary practice. Just to give you some context, Still is a 40-minute work where the audience sits in a shipping container in pre-dawn darkness, and as the sun rises, an aperture slowly opens in the container, framing the horizon, and reveals the sunrise over the course of the work. The score is actually by a Canadian composer, a woman by the name of Jessica Moss. Some of you might know her work in a band called The Silver Mount Zion. And I was given the task of creating an immersive audio experience for the audience by delivering Jess's score into the confines of the container. So this is where we begin to talk about the model and the world. So like so much stuff now, what we do is we actually model worlds. These spaces exist in the memories of computers where we can inhabit them via interfaces or project a window into them from our reality. So much of the work we've seen today is this, where we build a model virtually and then we put ourselves into it in some form or another. The current practice of the Platonic ideal in audio immersion is in models, right, as a way to create these immersive experiences. Before I get into the nitty-gritty with still, let's talk a little bit about these models. So this is an interface for Dolby Atmos's model. So you can see down here in the bottom corner is the picture of the room, and these green things flying around the room are sound emitters that are flying around the space. So this is what I mean when I say that Dolby Atmos is a model-based system. So what this means is aside from the tools to move the audio, 3D audio through the space like we're seeing here, Dolby Atmos is an intelligent distribution system. So you might have seen Dolby Atmos pop up as an indicator on like a modern TV, like when you stream something like Dolby Atmos, Dolby Vision, and you might have seen audio tagged with like Dolby Atmos in like Spotify or Tidal or a streaming service that you use. So what Dolby Atmos actually is a way for any compliant audio device to render this 3D model based on whatever listening equipment that you have. So if you've got a pair of headphones and you're listening on Spotify, actually not all headphones work, but like Apple AirPods do, there's a bunch of headphones that are 3D spatially aware headphones. The headphones have to know where they are in space for this to work. But what they will do is they will render a binaural version of this 3D model for you of whatever that music is. Likewise, if you've got that same Spotify system hooked up to a 7.1 system, it will render the same model but using the 7.1 speaker system. So the model doesn't change, just our window into it is the thing that changes. Likewise, if you're watching Severance on TV at the moment, it's mixed in Dolby Atmos and it's a 3D render, and the TV itself will play back that as best it can, that 3D model, or if you've got a soundbar, it'll do a slightly different version of that model based upon the technology it has available. So basically, if the system delivering the audio is intelligent in that it knows what speakers are connected to it, Dolby Atmos will render this 3D model into it to the best of its ability. Same thing happens in games, right? So we mentioned Unity before, so done a lot of work in games. This is over there, you can see the F1 Studio Emitter event. This is like an audio object inside the game. So games also are just models, and in game audio design, we place sound emitters into the model. So these are like virtual speakers in the world where sounds can come from. And as the player, or the camera, listener, so in the game you are represented by a camera and a pair of ears moving through that model, it'll render that as a 3D version of you moving through that world in real time. Also, these models in these games can be turned into a Dolby Atmos stream. So all that stuff I said about Dolby Atmos earlier can be applied in this context as well. As game engine audio physics and stuff improve, so does the vividness of this image. And in fact, there's an audio design platform called Wise that does the sort of audio equivalent of ray tracing, where it actually in real time calculates the way the sound in the game would travel out into the model and hit various surfaces and reflect back into you. So it actually, in real time, describes the acoustic nature of the space as a model. For still, though, I use something entirely different from these audio systems that I've described so far, but something that still uses a model. This system is in fact based on this third system from this slide from earlier. And I think it's interesting to note that the basis of this idea by Keller is actually what is at the roots of what we used in still, and it goes back to the 1930s as well. And that's this. This is a system called wavefield synthesis. So it looks fancy, sounds fancy, it is very fancy. I'll do my best to describe how the system works, but don't feel bad if you're getting swamped with info, like it's a lot of stuff. But in this system, imagine that each speaker becomes like a pixel in constructing a full image. So in combination, they act as a big array. And in this model, we create a virtual sound source. So here is the guitar. And then the system calculates what each speaker needs to do to represent the sound as if it was coming from that point in space. So it makes it appear as if sonically the guitar is appearing from behind that array of speakers. But the brilliant thing about this system is no matter where you sit in front of that array of speakers, the guitar will always appear like it's from that point in space. So the reason why this system worked really well for still as an immersive experience is that it doesn't require a sweet spot. There is no sweet spot when we're talking about a system that reproduces sound in this way. So here's inside the container of still, right? It's a 32-channel sound system. There are 16 speakers across the bottom and 16 speakers across the top. You can see just in that far corner there, the top speakers are a little bit hard to pick out. The platform that I used to do this is called Spat Revolution, and this is it here. It's capable of creating and delivering into lots of different formats. So it's not just for wavefield synthesis. You can do Atmos, you can do all sorts of spatial audio in this platform. The underlying research in this comes from an institute called IRCAM, which is the Institute for Research and Coordination in Acoustics and Music based in the Centre Pompidou in Paris. And again, the French, they pop up all throughout this stuff. They have a real preoccupation with spatial sound. IRCAM created the SPAT tool set, right, which is an open source set of tools for spatial or audio spatialization, predominantly used in the platform Max MSP. It's not for the faint of heart. Like if you're a Max head and you really want to go there, by all means do. But this is a sort of user interface version of that same technology. So in this work was my task to design the system and specify it, and then take all of Jess's work and then put it into this 3D model. So this video here shows the model inside of Spat Revolution. So the head that you can see here on the screen is the listener. And this is the point at which you can listen into the model via a pair of headphones. So it represents you as a virtual listener. You put a pair of headphones on, this is where you're listening from. And the red pair of objects there are the emitters, right? And so when you're sitting in the container, this is a stereo pair, so it's like a stereo track from the multi-channels, and this is where that stereo track would appear in front of you when you're sitting there. So the sound emanating from these little red spheres, these emitters, when played back from the actual speakers, will appear at that point in space. So this is the full mix of the piece. Now keep in mind, there's a lot of emitters in this thing. It looks really complicated. It's a bit of a humble brag, showing complicated pictures like this. But keep in mind that not all these objects are making sound all the time. Generally, it's like 8 to 10 of these objects will be making sound as the piece progresses through its 40-minute duration. So they're not all going at the same time. They're not all emanating at the same time. This is just the totality of the work. But this kind of shows you in this crude overlay drawing of what's actually happening here. So that this model is being applied into the reality of the situation, and so that these virtual sound sources appear for the audience as if they're like outside of the bounds of the container. So the reason, as I said before, why I chose this technology for this work is because there's no bad listening positioning here. So imagine, for example, that you had an orchestra laid out in front of you. So you've got high strings on the left-hand side, low strings on the right-hand side, winds and brass in the middle. If an audience member is sitting on the left-hand side, they just hear more of those high strings as if it was virtually in front of them. If the person's over the other side, they hear more of the low strings as if it was virtually in front of them, because of the way that this sound system represents what the actual sound wavefront will be doing as if it was appearing in front of you. In the end, this was really about giving the audience an experience where the sunrise is underscored. The tech isn't trumpeted as part of the work, right? We don't talk, for funders and people who are interested, we talk about it, but it's not a draw card to the work. It's not spoken about. Instead, the point is for the music to appear in line with the audience's vision, like where they're looking. So the music appears in the landscape as they're taking the work in. It doesn't sound like a bunch of speakers close to you creating a veil of sound that would actually interrupt your experience of like drawing your eye out to the horizon. In this context, the ensemble's laid out in front of you so that you can take in the horizon. The idea is to use this immersion in sound to create this sort of seamless experience. This is where we leave platonic behind. But it's tricky to work in this realm, right? Spat Revolution's expensive. That's a lot of speakers, it's a lot of tech. Like it's still, even though that's a really amazing system, and I think this is really at the cutting edge of stuff, it's still hard to access. I think the one thing too is educated listeners is really important. Like, we still don't yet have a really good way to talk about listening to sound in immersion. It's not just it's not an experience that we have on the regular, and so people don't really have a developed faculty for actually like discerning immersive listening, and I think that's a really important thing. It can be a disadvantage and an advantage, because as artists it means, well, I've had experiences where I've done fancy stuff with sound behind people, And I go, oh, what did you think of the experience? People are like, yeah, cool, I heard some stuff behind me, it was kind of cool. And you're like, oh, like I did all this work to do all these really detailed things, but no one really picked up on it, right? But as an artist, that can also be an advantage. Like that lack of understanding can still, like, is an opportunity to sort of bring people into experience. Okay, I'm going to pump through this. I'm probably going to go a little bit long, but hopefully not too long. Reveling in chaos, right? I'm going to leave it all behind. I'm going to talk about a couple more works with a bit of history thrown into the mix. The first work I want to talk about is another piece that I created with Dance North called Wayfinder, which is actually a proper dance work this time. Some of you may have seen Wayfinder. The piece was all about the joy and exuberance around finding our way back to human connections after COVID. And I was brought on this project in two capacities. First, I was asked to create the score based on the music of Melbourne band Hiatus Coyote. So the band basically provided me with full access to all of their multi-channel masters of their whole back catalogue, and I've rearranged and remixed to create the score. So here's a short clip of this work. So that gives you an example of the work. But the second aspect of this work was to create a moment of interaction and connection using sound. So I've long been super fascinated by the tactility and multiplicity of audio. And so for this, myself with the team at Dance North, but along with a couple of amazing designers, Nick Rue and Rob Larson, created these audio light objects you can see here, which we call pearls. Now, each pearl featured Hiatus Coyote singer Napalm's voice. So you basically hold Nay's voice in the palm of your hand. And I'd worked with Nay on another project called The River Sing, and I'd basically gathered a sort of audio snapshot of her voice. So singing lots of individual notes, improvisations. So I basically had a sort of virtual Nay to some extent. And then I used that to construct this moment in the performance where these orbs are distributed around the audience, and in the middle of the performance the dance work stops and they just have this moment of this sound in the audience. Here's a little excerpt of that. It starts off with just a few pearls and then it builds into the full 100. So what you're hearing is the audience reacting as more and more of them come to life. So the impact of the moment on the audience was really significant because the experience is like you're in the middle of a chorale of like May's voice, like this impossible choir of her voice. It's tactile and immersive, but from a tech point of view, the hard part was building 100 custom objects. So it's got like a small Arduino board on it, it's got a small speaker with an amplifier, it's got lighting, a LED lighting rig and an MP3 player built into it. But beyond that, this is immersion at its absolute simplest. So there's no fancy spatial audio garbage, there's none of this modeling tools, there's none of that sort of stuff. It's just a lot of speakers spread around the place. And basically leaning into the chaos of what might happen. So the audience passing the speakers around, that's not a gesture they're asked to do, it's just what they do spontaneously in the work every time. People just want to pass them around between each other, it's just what occurs. So it allows things to be like spontaneous, to be playful, like to be interesting in some way, so many ways. So this next one I'll just show you was a short test with all the pearls on the table, just to give you a sense of like how interesting and intense 100 cheap, tiny mono speakers. Like these are cheap, they're tiny little speakers, they're cheap as chips, like, but there's just 100 of them, but this is what it's like when you get them all going at the same time, in close proximity. I don't even think that's the full 100. And that's just on the iPhone's audio, of course. So the thing about this style of work is that it actually has a philosophical and conceptual origin. So this is the French composer and sonic theorist, Pierre Schaeffer. So Schaeffer was the first artist to coin the term musique concrète, which some of you might have heard, which translates to absolute sound. So it means music made up of actual sounds of the world, not musical sounds, just sounds found in the world. Essentially, Schaeffer is sort of the progenitor of tearing down the walls between music and sound and what we now call sound design. So composing music with pure sound, or composing soundscapes, sound scores, sound film design. It kind of, a lot of it really finds its origins here. Schaeffer was surrounded by a group of peers and artists who were at the vanguard of like European music that were using the emerging technologies in the post-war period. This picture here is a thing called the acousmonium. As part of the school working around Schaeffer was a composer named Francois Bale, and he had the idea of a speaker orchestra, where instead of humans playing instruments, speakers took the stage. And also not the same speaker, as many varieties of speakers to kind of match the variety of instruments in the orchestra. The interesting thing is that the music for this is performed live. So the actual mix that happens, it isn't preordained, it isn't multi-channel. What it is actually like the performer sitting at the mixing console performing the spatialization live. These concerts still happen today. So if you're ever in Paris, go and check it out. The GRM is the organisation that runs them, and they still run them even today. So, you know, there's one coming up here in May, which is really interesting. If you get a chance, if you're happy to be fortunate enough to be in Paris when one of these is going on, please go have a look. Or listen, I should say. So the way that it works is you can see here that this artist is in front of the mixing console, and each speaker is on a fader. The playback can be multi-channel, but oftentimes it's just stereo. They just put all the left channels on one side of the console, all the right channels on another side of the console. The composers compose the piece so they know what's coming. They can anticipate like how to actually do this kind of immersive spatialization in real time. And no two shows are the same. So it means that it's not really repeatable. It's like every experience of it is a one-off. Again, it ignores this kind of control paradigm and leans into chaos. It finds novelty and develops and builds upon this idea of novelty in immersion. This term, acousmonium, comes from this word acousmatic. So this is, in the end, basically, it means that you just can't hear exactly where the sound is coming from. You can't really identify where it's coming from. And the pearls were kind of intended to work in this way. So if they were close to you, if you had one in your hand, of course you could hear the sound was coming from you. But if you were further away from it, it would just create this collective sound where it wasn't particularly clear where the sound was coming from at any point in time. If you want to create an immersive experience, that's another way that you can do it. You don't have to do this controlled environment situation. You can just throw sound around the space and like let it do what it does. This then brings me to Perth and to this work called Siren Song. So I mentioned before, I'm eternally grateful to the Noongar folks because it was with their blessing of their elders and contributors from their community that in 2018 we created this large-scale work for the Perth Festival, along with my collaborators Hannah Fox and Tom Supple. The work featured Noongar and other First Nations artists singing in language from and among the skyscrapers of St George's Terrace. I was chuffing a chuckle when St George's Terrace popped up in the previous talk. And in fact, the video I show you is pretty much taken from the same spot in that VR game. This work utilises a multi-channel sound system, in this iteration using 500 speakers distributed across the roofs and balconies. So you can see the speakers here across the top edge of that building. These speakers, by the way, are the crudest, rudest, oldest speakers you can get. They're not fancy, they're just called a horn speaker, and they've sort of really been around since the beginnings of like public address systems. Not only that, but the work also features a helicopter singing from the sky using a specifically designed speaker system for wide area notification. So in essence, this work seeks to capture people completely by surprise and bring them into a unique moment. For a few minutes at dusk, the world is transformed by experiencing an environment where human voices, all connected to the land in some way, intervene in the mundane by singing at a scale that matches and contains the surroundings. So like all artworks, many meanings can spill out from it, but one that I'd like to share with you is that it's in some ways an attempt to pull into our current time some moment from a possible future where collective moments of mystery and beauty populate the spaces that are occupied by these architectural symbols of capital. I'm usually pretty resistant to actually showing any audio-video documentation of this work because I find the reduction of the experience that takes place in any recording format pretty unbearable. So for the nerds here, like I hear like binaural, ambisonic, 360 videos, VR experiences. Each one of those flattens the totality of the work in its own uniquely sophisticated way. However, for the context of this talk, I'm going to show you a short excerpt of the video from one evening taken by a member of the public. So this is a gentleman by the name of Ian Black who posted this video on YouTube. I actually sometimes find the rawness of videos taken by people experiencing the work kind of maybe do a better job of like giving some sense of like what it's really like to experience it. But it's funny with all the sophisticated technology, like the more sophisticated it gets, the closer it gets so close, but then gets so far away. It's a kind of audio uncanny valley of sorts in a weird way. The voices that you'll hear in this excerpt, the first one you'll hear is Persian artist and Perth resident Tara Tiba. And then the second voice you'll hear again is Yorda Yorda, composer and artist Deborah Cheatham. You'll hear Deborah's voice coming from the helicopter. So this slide gives you some context for the scale of the work. So on the screen here, you can see the terrace running left to right with the speaker locations and projections. So here the speakers are positioned to make the most of the acoustic capacity in the environment and the buildings themselves to create this immersive sonic environment. The glass and concrete towers act as reflectors and diffusers of sound, and sound projected into the space at this scale bounces off all these multifaceted surfaces, reflecting in all these complex ways, creating endless acoustic novelty. So for the listener, the sound comes from like everywhere and nowhere. The buildings become the singers. The city becomes a concert hall, like designed by some chaotic acoustician. The tools used to create and deliver Siren Song don't make use, again, of any fancy, complicated, sophisticated technology. There's no multi-channel panning system, there's no modelling, there's none of that stuff. In the work, we pointedly don't use the technology to control. In this work is not interested in the often unspoken and readily accepted demand that most technological tools and platforms make upon creators of VR. That which sort of reflects those industrial, material, capital demands, you know, to be consistent, to be repeatable, to be known. Instead, the work uses technology to create a novel situation, and really the technology leverages our ability to iterate on the work. That's the really key thing here. So this is myself and Hannah here. We had occupied an empty floor of one of the buildings on St George's Terrace and sat here every day composing new works. So myself, along with Tom and Hannah, have no idea how the work is actually going to sound. So in this way, the heart of the work's experimental. And as a sidebar, I just like to emphasise that experimentation is a process. And personally, I reject the use of experimental when it's used as a genre in sound and music in particular. So in this experimental work, we have a theory about how the sound might function in any given environment. We then plan the sound system in the first piece on this basis. We then interact into the practical part of the experiment, which is we listen to that first piece, we gather what we can from that experience, and then we write an entirely new piece for the next night. And that's the way the piece iterates, night after night after night after night. So you only get to hear one of these pieces once. The next piece, the next night is different material, different considerations of how the sound is spatialised. In this way, each performance of Siren Song is unique for ourselves and the audience who experience it, which again is exciting, it's fun, it's playful, it's invigorating to do this as an artist. The interesting technology was really based on deployment. So here we developed our own playback system, which is based on a Raspberry Pi. With this system, we create the compositions, upload the files to Dropbox, distribute them out to these speaker sites, which gives us synchronized playback based on GPS time of day data. So basically pieces can be iterated and distributed rapidly. This use of technology doesn't have anything really to do with the immersion itself, but it supports this open and experimental process in like composing the work. So sometimes technology is not so much about actually execution as it is about like deploying a process in this context. Since then, and this piece, this is a shot from the River Sing in Melbourne, we've developed a relationship with a German audio technology company that produces speakers that fall under this category that's called LRAD, which stands for Long Range Acoustic Device. Most people have heard about these in the context of the weaponization of sound. So LRADs have often been referred to like, you know, in terms of like crowd control, riot dispersion, these kind of things. Also uses terror weapons in war. Instead, we leverage this technology to create these large-scale immersive audio experiences. On the top of this lighting tower here, you've got each one of these speakers. They weigh less than 10 kilos in weight, but they can cast sound clearly over a distance of well over a kilometre from each one of these speakers. So this is from The River Sing, which is a work that myself, Tom Supple and Deborah Cheatham made. And the concept of this work was to literally give voice in language to the Birrarung and Maribyrnong rivers that are the life givers in the lands of the Kulin Nation. So these speaker systems were occupied around areas at various points in the river, and like singers in language would sing out the story, some poetry of the stories of the Birrarung and Maribyrnong rivers. I'm getting to the end of it. We also made work for the Fremantle Biennale called The Port's Call. You can see the LRAD speakers there just wedged in between the ship and the light there. It's a large-scale work that's sailing vessels entering and departing the port of Fremantle during the Biennale. So the idea of this work was to give voice to the vessels themselves, transforming the kind of mythology of ocean voyage and fusing with science fiction connotations of like galactic travels, the idea of journeying into the unknown. Particularly the night works were really amazing, as you would hear this sound and just watch this boat sort of just disappear out to the dark void of the ocean. It's really an amazing experience, but you can see the LRAD system here that's deployed. Again, using our custom playback system, and this gives you again the scale of the work at the Port of Fremantle with all the various sites that we used. But again, the whole concept of this work is to lean into chaos, to lean into the unknown, to forget about control, and to actually like have novelty, complexity, be the thing that actually generates the immersion in sound. So I'm going to stop. So while technology can provide these endless possibilities when it comes to immersion audio, I hope this has given you some orientation as to the nature and the scale of the territory. And while technologically these complex systems give the illusion of control, I just think never forget that a few speakers placed in a space that are well considered and working in sympathy with their content is all you actually need to create that meaningful immersive experience. Like, I've shown works at scale here that are kind of like probably really beyond the means of folks making work in this room, but I think it's just important to note that the ideas that feeding this stuff all come from sort of like things that are accessible to you. And when I was going to hopefully do a demonstration, I was just going to literally put some speakers out to the room and spread them around and just go, cool, I'm just going to spread some speakers out in the room, play some sound. You'll hear what that is like as an immersive experience. And I think also too, don't forget that it's just a practical thing. So if you have a couple of speakers in a space, just try things out. Like move the sound around. Like develop your own relationship to the tactility of audio and how simple technologies can just interact with spaces in suggestive ways to create novel and immersive sonic experiences. If you want to follow me on Blue Sky, you can there. And this is a QR code to the documentation film of the Port's Call if anyone's interested in having a look at it. Thank you very much. I know it was a bit of a speed round, but thank you for your patience.